Neera, thanks so much for joining me today. I've always been fascinated by your journey because from doing all the things that people aspire to do, which is really get a great degree from Harvard, go to a global investment bank, be on the fast lane, you decided to give it up and actually work and do far more substantial work in the backyards of India, so to say, working with NGOs. So I'm going to start by asking you, what were your early influences? And when you started off, did you ever think that you'd be sitting across over here, on top of something like Dasra?
No, I mean, I don't think I ever imagined Dasra at all, and it seems pretty lame that I didn't imagine it. But I don't know, I feel like when you grow up, and I grew up in like an Indian family in Canada, and so, you had to do well in school, and my parents were both engineers, so they were like, you have to study math or engineering or science because women don't do that. So we had sort of these things that we had to do, and so I just sort of followed that path. But I think what happens is, I don't know if you have certain life experiences or you get exposed to things and you realize that, I don't know, the privileges that you have, if you can use that to do something more meaningful. For me, it was a bit of a slow journey. So I was definitely part of the group that wanted to do well in school. Then I went to Morgan Stanley and I was, 22 on Wall Street, making $100,000, which you never imagine it's more than my parents ever made. And then, you get into Harvard Business School, which does a whole lot for your self-confidence. And then you feel like, okay, maybe I should do something meaningful. And worst case, if it doesn't work out, someone will give me a job. So my fear was always like, will I have a job? Will I have a job? And so it's been 16 years since Dasra's been around. And we started in 1999 and I came in 2003. And it's definitely been a journey. And so I think, for myself, it started with, and I think for Deval, both of us that started it, it was kind of around how do you use your skills. I think in investment banking, and especially when you're an analyst, I was in the mergers and acquisitions team, I felt like I learned a lot of hard skills. And so you learn sort of modeling. I came with a math background. You learn PowerPoint, and you're basically drilled in all these kinds of like formatting and attention to detail. And I think that with that set of skills at that age, it's really important. And you work really hard. So we worked 100, 120 hours a week, and you thought it was cool to be working that hard.
So you're saying that the rigor that the training in maths taught you, or your MBA program taught you, and your work taught you, helped you in figuring out your mind?
Yeah, so you feel like you have a set of hard skills, right? Because I think when you're younger, you're like, am I good at something? And so I think once you gain in that, you need to start kind of think about other things, which was a lot about what I learned, honestly, at Harvard Business School. It had so much to do with self-confidence because you kind of get in and then you in a class with all these slightly overachievers. And so I think at that age, it had been after I did my undergrad, I worked for a few years and then went to Harvard Business School. And a lot of what you're taught there is around leadership, right? And how can you influence in a way to make this world a better place? And whether it's brainwashing or whatever it is, you sort of leave that place feeling all of a sudden responsible for making a difference. And I think it's a combination of all of that mishmashed into, okay, now what do I do with my skills in the nonprofit sector? And it really became, well, why don't we play this role of facilitation where there's philanthropy and there's corporate money, and how do we make this more strategic and connect it to nonprofits and sort of help them scale?
I think that's very interesting, and I will talk to you about Dasra and how you use your basic skill sets to really develop and build on the idea of Dasra. But I'm going to take a step back. Many students aim at getting that dream job. And, then it becomes the ambition of getting to the top of your job. It takes a mental shift to give up on $100,000 of a salary and venture out. What made you do that?
So I've never felt like I gave up. And so when people say that, you're kind of like, did I really give up something? And I think I looked at it more as I was privileged enough to be able to take that as an opportunity. But I think there's a turning point in your life where you realize and you try to understand, like, what is it that you're motivated by? And so in investment banking, if you're going to stay in that field, frankly, you need to be motivated by money. And I think I realized that I was motivated by wanting to make a difference, and that, if I could help an organization with management stuff that seemed others in the corporate world could easily access if I could bring that sort of capacity building. It just felt like I was making a difference, and that's what I was motivated by. And you realize that you need a certain amount of money for a certain lifestyle, and what's that lifestyle? And so I think somehow making those choices allows you to really discover. So I realized I didn't need to have, a gigantic house and a whole bunch of cars. Were not something that I was motivated by. And so now I can't provide my kids with all these assets, but you kind of realize you're going to make this choice and there will be other privileges and opportunities for you.
I've heard a lot about the Harvard kind of education, which opens up, the classroom opens you up to ideas, to real life case studies, etc. How important was that education, that pause that you took in your career to help you understand what you wanted to do?
So, I feel like it's so a lot, unfortunately, fortunately, a lot of this is in retrospect. I mean, when I got into Harvard or when I was applying, it was very much, that's what you did, right? You did your undergrad, you worked for a few years, and then people applied to business school from investment banking, or you went to a private equity fund. And so I was like, let me just kind of try it out. And I think once I got in, I was like, oh my goodness, I got in, I better go. I'd be an idiot to not go. But I think in retrospect, the HBS case methodology and the learning environment that they create for you, you get exposed to so many different business situations in a very real way that frankly it teaches you that you're never going to have enough information. And in whatever role you play, you're going to need to make decisions with limited amounts of information. And how do you do that? And so the more you see certain situations, you get better at being able to make decisions. And I think for me, that was a tremendous learning. Now, after the fact, I don't think I went there and probably used it as well as I could have. And so if I knew I was going to do Dasra out of Harvard Business School, I probably would have pursued professors or research in a much more proactive way. And so if I could give young people advice, it's like when you go to the graduate schools or when you're doing further research, really use that opportunity to match it with where you see yourself, because it's such a great, rich learning environment.
When you started, you told me that you went to UBS before you actually joined Dasra, and they will started Dasra. When did the penny drop for you and they will? When did you guys sit across the table? How did that learning come? That hey, let's do something like this. So when did the penny drop for you?
So I think it dropped differently for both of us. I think for him it was like 2 years at Morgan Stanley, he's like, I'm going to try to make a difference. I'm going to go and give this a shot. And I got into business school, so I was like, you're crazy. You go save the world. I'm going to go to Harvard Business School, and we'll see where our paths sort of meet. And in the beginning, we fundraised together and thought about sort of what Dasra could be. And then I think it was after business school, and literally it was kind of sitting, frankly, at UBS after business school and asking myself, I could have been in this position having not gone to business school. In fact, both of us used to make fun of people at Morgan Stanley who went to business school and came back to banking. And so then you feel like, wasn't the point for me to progress in some way? And wasn't there now an opportunity to influence? And what was there to lose? So I think there's a time in your life where you can take a lot more risk. It wasn't like we were married. I didn't have any kids. So it was just myself, I felt like that was taking the risk. And so I said, what was the worst thing that could happen is this thing wouldn't work out and we'd figure it out. And so I think assessing that sort of risk and not having those attachments made it, frankly, a lot easier to do.
The other way of looking at it is, for a lot of people watching this, is that you had your base covered. You had solid, backups to go into something like that. Did that also play a part, that, you really need to get the right skill sets which empower you to do many, many things, and that's when you have actual choice?
No, absolutely. I think, somebody would have said, well, you had enough after Morgan Stanley. Why didn't you do it then? It was like, so I think everybody has a certain level of risk tolerance. And so for me, frankly, and maybe it sounds lame, it was Harvard Business School. I was like, somebody will give me a job. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that a certain amount of skills or jobs or exposure gives you, that confidence, but it's also a reality. You see a younger generation that's willing to take a lot more risk, and I find it extremely inspiring in some ways. And in some ways I'm like, is this fully thought through? But yeah, I think there's a lot more opportunity for folks to be able to move around, to start their own things.
Did you look at role models when you were going along? Did you have like role models that you aspire to be? Or what did you like? What would you have liked to be at that stage?
So, I don't think I had any one person that's, a clear role model, but I think I have always been inspired by people who pursue their passions. Even right now in my nonprofit work, I find activists and folks who are extremely dedicated to a cause. And so a lot of it was also, and now that I look back, is that some of the influence was my grandmother and my mother, and a role that women play in society to be a contrarian to what social norms were, I think was a significant driver for me after the fact. So now I look back and I'm like, my parents were crazy. Why were they insisting that I do science and math? But if you think about it, my mother was like, there's not enough women in these professions. So my sister went to MIT and did engineering. And she was like, okay, fine, Neera, why don't you just do math? And that came easily to me. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll do math. But if you think about, then I went into investment banking, which is a very male-dominated environment. And for me, you did see women in banking rise up, and I was inspired by these women, how they managed family, how they managed to be successful careers. And, in that time, it was all about balance. I think now in retrospect, it's sort of impossible to balance both sides. But I think that's been a thread for me in terms of what can we do in terms of gender, and how can I break some of those barriers? And the same thing in Harvard Business School, where that learning environment inherently works against women. We don't put our hand up that easily. We're not as self-confident in those learning spaces. And so I have been extremely challenged and feel like competitive. That makes me want to make a difference also, I think. So I think women and the roles that women play and different leadership roles that I see women breaking through, I think has been inspiring. And so whether it's my grandmother was a psychiatrist, moved to Canada, and she did her residency there, in the 50s. Then my mother was the first electrical engineering out of IIT Kharagpur. So in retrospect, I think all of that shaped me, then women at Morgan Stanley, and then now you see other women in the field at these nonprofits. So yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm going to talk about the theme of women and balancing, because I think it's very important for young women to plan their lives also keeping in mind what they should be doing and what they will eventually have in terms of children, etc. But I want to come to the start of Dasra. Looking back on Dasra, you can romanticize the entire thing and say, hey, from Morgan Stanley you came straight to Harvard, and then you came here and you're doing some great work funding NGOs. But I know the early years were quite a challenge, where you traveled, I know you were telling me, with a small child, a newborn baby literally, into the deep backwaters of India. What was that experience like? And for you who'd never stayed in India or lived in India, what was the sense that you got?
So it was a bit of a journey for me, and I think what is worth mentioning is that while I was in business school, in my summer I worked at Women's World Banking. Microfinance was hot at this time, and so Nancy Berry, who started Women's World Banking, came on campus and said, I need somebody who's been in a village and can build a financial model. And I was like, oh, that's me. And so I came and I worked for Seva in Ahmedabad, and I really thought I wanted to be at the grassroots. I was like, I want to be part of this women's empowerment movement, and I want to bring women from the community to take more leadership and ownership in their lives. But frankly, I wasn't the best suited for it. I could speak Hindi, but it's not great. And I wasn't, from the community. And so I think realizing where my skills were best suited, even though I romanticized about wearing a khadi sari and being in the village was what I really wanted to do, I realized that my skills were far better being in this sort of, intermediary space. So that was a bit of an awakening for me. And I think the whole, how do you sort of balance kids with building, the challenge of building an organization, I think you kind of have to find what you're comfortable doing with. And I found it extremely comfortable just to take, Ayush was my eldest then, take him just with me, and not being so particular about things, and seeing the experience and yet having your child with you was great. in retrospect. At the time, I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. But, he would sleep in a drawer and I would put a mosquito net on him. I'd take him to different places. I went to government meetings and he'd sit in a chair and I'd be like, I need to feed him. The government official's like, okay, you can use my office over here. And everybody would wait outside and then come back. So I feel like whatever we have in our heads isn't always sort of play out in reality. And so I think people are really open to helping you through that. Yeah, I don't know if that...
Yeah, that answers it beautifully. But, when you came here, I think what Dasra has done to a large extent is really handhold a lot of NGOs which are doing great work. And we need many, many more Dasras, given the scale of the problem and the scale of the need to scale up, so to say. So when you came, what was your experience in handholding NGOs and getting them the right funding, getting the right processes, and how did your learnings help them?
So, I think for me, just coming with, I think I came with it now that I see, the next generation, a sense of humility, right? And really feeling like I was so excited to be helpful in any way, all the way from writing a proposal to helping to design a logo. I mean, this was none of my skills. So I was just like, can I help you in any way whatsoever? And so from really being like, how can I help you? It's really grown now to how can we be more structured? And so, there are some key components around management that help to build sort of these nonprofits. So it's very much been a journey from being open to help in any way to kind of now realizing there are some real critical levers to be able to help organizations. But at bottom line, at the crux of what enables any of these organizations to be successful, frankly, is leadership. Whoever's heading these organizations, the kinds of individuals they are and the vision that they have and the model that they want to really execute on, it's that individual that enables really the organization to be able to achieve. And so being able to work at a leadership level, coaching some of them, but also helping them think through how they build the organization, I think that is really what I've learned over time is a critical success factor.
For many students, and because this is a piece that we are, using to reach out to students, for many students, working in an NGO is not the first thing that comes to mind when they are passing out of college or actually wanting to plan a career, because NGOs are seen as, very small scale, individual driven organizations, unless you're with a big, NGOs which are funded with multilateral agencies, etc. So has it changed? And what would your advice be to youngsters who want to make a change and could want to find an avenue to do so?
So I feel from the time that I started to sort of now, it's changed significantly. I mean, I think just the opportunities and the richness with what your role could be, even if you graduate fresh out, I think a tremendous number of opportunities exist. And I think it is about finding that right opportunity for you. And so there's a whole range. I think where I often feel challenged is the nonprofit sector is strapped for resources, right? So when you're at a certain age and you've come out of, say, undergrad, you've just graduated from college, what are the skills that you're coming with? A nonprofit invests significantly in you to build your capacity to be able to help the nonprofit. And then, are you going to stick around? So because they're so strapped for resources, it's difficult to easily just move at such a young age into a nonprofit. But I think those opportunities exist. If you are inspired by the mission, everything else falls into place. And I feel like, generations after me are so much more driven by wanting to make a difference, feeling inspired by a mission, demanding that organizations give them channels to participate in the community, which we didn't have, I think, in definitely not my parents' generation. And it was a lot harder in mine, where you felt like you had to follow a certain path and that was success, right? And I feel like defining success is quite different now.
For a lot of youngsters who want to get into the NGO space, would you also say that skill sets is also important? So if you're in a finance MBA, it doesn't mean that you can't work in the NGO space, right? Because in India, because you're so compartmentalized in your mind, so early that if you don't do a master's in social work, you don't get into an NGO. So you don't really have that lateral movement, you know. So how have you seen that change?
So, I feel like it's not even the NGO sector or the nonprofit sector. I think even in the corporate sector, it's almost like we're back to the basics, where you need smart people. You need people who have strong analytical skills, strong problem-solving skills, and all of that can come from different places. I mean, I know when I was at Morgan Stanley, some of the smartest people came from liberal arts. They weren't the people coming from math. And so I feel like there's a core foundation of skills that come from different ways that you need. And so you may have a finance background and come with an MBA, but are you a great problem solver, right? And do you have other skills that enhance that? And I feel like there's more and more roles, whether corporate sector, nonprofit sector, that looks at actually a mix of things.
The other thing is that our education system also compartmentalizes a lot of students over here. I mean, you've been a votary and your own life experience shows the multiple influences that, helped you decide what you want to do. So do you think students need to open their minds to new influences, to new skill sets, to really open their mind to new ideas in a nutshell, to be able to succeed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like in this day and age, you need to take way more initiative, and you have access to so much information online. You can access people so much more easily. You can travel. And so a combination, I think, of reading, talking to people, traveling and seeing different organizations or experiences and cultures and communities, I think sort of that enriches you as an individual and allows you to really contribute, whether it's to an organization or to your own idea. I feel that perspective only adds on. So I think school is important. I mean, don't get me wrong. And I think you learn certain things in school, but I feel so much more is available to people, and it has to actually be driven by the individual to want to take the initiative to kind of get out there.
There's a lot to be said for, learning and relearning and redeveloping your skills. How would you approach that?
But I think it's hard. And as you kind of get older, it kind of gets even harder. And so I think that especially leadership of these organizations. So I think a lot of it has to do with what age and stage you are in your life. So I think there's a certain time frame where it's absolutely necessary, right? Keep building those skills. But comes a point in time where you need to recognize your strengths and bring and complement folks with the skills that you may not have. But I think it takes a certain temperament and motivation to actually want to improve yourself, because you can get lazy, right? And you can say, I'm comfortable in where I am. And it takes a special person, I think, with a certain drive to be like, I want to improve myself. I want to know more. I want to be seen as an expert. And you're starting to see younger folks actually be motivated by, what is the skills that I have, and demanding that actually of organizations. Like, what's my professional development here? And I would encourage folks to actually ask those questions. I see people looking for mentors. And so you need our generation actually to be role models and to mentor and play the whole role of helping these folks actually skill up. So,
Dasra has grown tremendously, Neera, and I know you've got a lot of youngsters who've come into the fold. How do you see the change when you get new generations of activists, who come into Dasra? How have you seen things change in that context?
I think honestly, from my perspective, it's been very refreshing, but at times it's a bit of a pain in the ass. But I think the reality is this is clearly an age group that is quite mission driven and are willing to really work hard and give it their best and are passionate about wanting to make a difference. And so I think getting this younger group that has the set of skills that they do is a privilege, right, for an organization like Dasra. But there's this whole, what we call the millennials, or this Generation Y, that is a challenging group, right? They have this sense of sort of entitlement, or what is the organization doing for me? And I think that's placed a responsibility on Dasra to really think about how are we building careers for these young people and how are we skilling and developing them further. And even if they don't stay here, it's okay because they're going to move on to another organization and influence the sector. And so I think starting to think about how we institutionally support younger people, given the kind of mindset and expectations they have, is really important for Dasra, but I think it's important for really any organization.
But when you deal with funding agencies or funders, you're dealing with people at different stages of the evolution of giving for causes, right? What are the learnings that you have when you deal with these people? Many of these people are really successful people who want to give out, and I know you work with many institutions like Nani Kali, etc., which are run by Anand Mahindra and the likes, or international donors, the Gates Foundation, etc. What have you learned in this journey?
For me, I've learned to be patient. I think you're just you want to make a difference and you're so busy doing things all the time that you're like, I'm sitting in front of a philanthropist, I'm like, how can you not want to give? And so I think realizing that there's an awareness and an education process and that people are giving away hard-earned money. And so I need to be patient to help them make sure that it's having the impact, that they want. I think I'm also very inspired by these individuals, the kinds of businesses that they've built and how much they've sacrificed. It's not easy to build these companies or family businesses. And so when you learn about the commitment that they have to the business, speaking to them about the possibility of the kinds of organizations they could support or match it with the impact that they're trying to have, I feel like it's something that I can help them with. And that's honestly what's motivating is when they do decide to give, right? And a lot in these last 5 years in the country, I have seen sort of philanthropy really increase and really be strategic. And it's honestly a younger generation. It's the next generation of wealth or, folks who are heading companies who are finally keeping their sort of hats on that they've run their businesses with and approaching sort of philanthropy with the same.
Right now, at this juncture, who are your role models? Who would you say that you really admire? Because you've been exposed to a whole new world that you hadn't been exposed to.
Yeah.
So who would you say that is really inspiring you at this juncture?
So I feel like I keep getting inspired by different people. Every time I meet them, I'm inspired by a whole variety of folks, which may seem really flippant, probably. But so last week, I was facilitating Dasra Social Impact. It's a leadership program where we bring 35 leaders of nonprofit organizations, and it's a class we do with Harvard Business School. And it's 4 modules, but you do a number of cases. And this whole session with this class was sort of leadership and strategy. And we did a case called Ernest Shackleton. And Shackleton, it was about leadership in crisis. And I was really motivated. He's an adventurer, and he takes this whole group to try to discover a crossover Antarctic, and just ends up really being in a crisis where they lose their boat, and he kind of thinks about how do you bring this group together and bring them back alive. So there was sort of that case, and if I think about how much he thinks about his team and is caring and trying to really build that spirit and sort of leading from the front, I found that really inspiring sort of last week, and it's brought a lot of learnings for me back home. Then we did Meg Whitman. She was the CEO of eBay that Pierre Omidyar hired to really take eBay to the next level. She went to Harvard Business School as well. But if you look sort of at her leadership style and how she's able to come into an organization and really build eBay from, the 35 people to $1 billion success story, but just how she approached, how she came into the company, sort of her leadership style, how she built the organization, was a real learning experience for all of us in the class. And I found it quite inspiring, all of her experiences, and now she's sort of at HP, which is like a turnaround kind of story. So I think, being very versatile with the skills that you have and being willing to move into different environments where you can, make a difference and really use your leadership, I find that very inspiring from her, where I'm like, what's my next stage? And as Dasra continues to grow, is my role to be able to use the skills I have. I see her as a role model in terms of really being able to think about, where could I, make a difference even, and move out of your comfort zone and move to a different environment that pushes you to continue to learn and to change the way you think. But I think at your core, I think that stays the same, but that was very interesting for me too.
So in many senses, the way where you are right now, you've made Dasra quite a success, you've got big plans. Would you say that even you're in the stage where you would look at how to develop yourself to the next level? I mean, what is that internal thinking process like for you?
Yeah, I feel like I always want to learn. I've built up the research team here, so I feel like I'm always learning, new issues. So some of that is just maybe, personality. But yeah, I feel like at some point Dasra's grown beyond my capabilities, and where is my learning, going to come from? And so frankly, actually, just the other day, I was like, what am I really interested in just as an issue? And I think more and more, given the way the world is, I feel like migration and refugee and being, having moving populations is a real issue for sort of the world. And how are we going to manage through some of that crisis? And so I kind of looked online and I was like, wow, there's this really cool course at Harvard that's a certification program. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's online and then you show up for 2 weeks in Italy and then you do a 5-month online course. But yeah, I think all of us are looking for.
And do you think the online platform offers huge opportunity to learn, to reskill, to open your minds? Because suddenly everything is on in front of you on a PC.
Yeah.
Or an iPad or a smartphone, you don't know.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous learning opportunity from online platform, but I don't think we've totally cracked it. And I think you need leading institutions and you need more innovation around it, because to replace the relationship with, this teacher, lecturer, or discussion in person to help learning is a really tough thing to replace. So I think it can enhance. And if you look at, I think HBS, followed a little bit later, but ended up coming up with HBSX, right, which is an online platform. I think there's tremendous opportunity for it to be leveraged, but I think it has to be complemented with other things around it.
Last question, Neera. Sitting from your vantage point and having done all the multiple things that you have, what is your advice to youngsters? What would your advice be to the Neera who applied at Harvard many
years ago? My advice to young people, if I was speaking to a Neera years ago, would be, really follow. Dream sounds a bit cheesy, but really follow your passion and follow what it is that you want to do. And you may need to do that at the expense of not having the support you would want, whether it's family, whether it's friends. It may not be things that others do in, sort of society. And I think if you've thought it through and you have the confidence and really courage, right, to be able to pursue what it is that you want to do, I think you should just go for it. And you'll be surprised that as you gain in your momentum, people will come and people will sort of follow.